The opinions and views expressed on this program do not reflect those of management or staff of Staten Island Television.
All statements, opinions, and views expressed in this program are for educational purposes only and are not a substitute for medical advice or recommendations of any type. You should consult with your medical professional before any diet or exercise program.
Thank you for joining the 50 Plus Fit Club. Please welcome your host, the trainer motivator, medical exercise specialist, Tony Books Avilez.
Hello, my name is Tony Books Avilez, and welcome to the 50 Plus Fit Club, where we discuss health, fitness, wellness, and weight loss, specifically for people 50 and over to share the secrets to divine health, a dynamic body, and a phenomenal life.
The Ozempic episode.
You need to know.
This is a presentation of the obesity trends as studied by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control of the United States. And this is a study that began in 1985, and it follows the obesity trends based upon two criteria. The body mass index, which is an indicator that is determined by someone's height and weight to determine what their body size is and how healthy it is or unhealthy it is. And the other criteria is for someone to be 30 pounds overweight. And it begins in 1984, with most of the states having not rendered any data, but the states who have rendered data show that some of them have populations of less than 10% that meet that criteria of obesity. And some of the states have 10 to 14% of their population that meet that criteria. So as we continue, we see that more states are reporting that data. In 1986, we find that more states are reporting, and there's a trend that shows some states that have less than 10% obesity rate, and some of those states are now recording 10 to 14%. Now, as we increase, as we go through the following years, we see that more states are reporting, and there's a greater level of states that are showing a higher level of obesity rates in their population. As we get to 1990, we have just a few states that have not reported, but the states who have reported is that most of them are showing that those obesity rates are growing. Few of them have 10 or less percent, and more of them are showing a percentage of 10 to 14%. Now in 1991, we have a new category where we see that some states are reporting 15 to 19% of obesity rates in their state. So the trend continues with more states are showing that the obesity rates are growing. Now we have all the states finally reporting, and we have these new categories. And as we go further into the study, we see that more states are trending to higher obesity rates until we get to 1997, where we have a whole new category that shows up. 20% or more obesity rates in 3 states. And as we continue, we see more states adopting that higher percentage until we get to 2001. And what do we see? A whole new category. The first state shows up with a 25% or higher obesity rate, and more states adopting higher obesity rates in comparison to the remaining. As a matter of fact, you can see only one state remains at that 10 to 14%, and there are no more states that have 10% or less obesity rates. And as we continue, we see it starts to trend even higher, where more states are going up to 20 to 25%, and more states are adopting the 25 and above level. And as we get to 2005, we see a whole new category where we see new states are adopting a 30 plus percentage of obesity rates. And it continues until we see more of those states adopting higher levels. As a matter of fact, only one state remaining in that 15 to 19%, and no states at less than 10 or 10 to 14%. And it continues until we see a trend at 2009 where most of the states have higher obesity rates and only one state at 15 to 19%. And as we progress up until recent history, we'll see that the progression is even more staggering. With the American obesity rate being approximately 40% and 18% being seriously obese to morbidly obese, and these obesity rates climbing primarily in children, as well as the complications associated with obesity, such as cardiovascular disease, joint diseases, diseases of the liver, asthma, sleep apnea, and the like, it's not a wonder that 20 years ago, science introduced new medications called GLP-1 agonists as a means to address this current situation. So let's learn a little bit about GLP-1 agonists and how they work.
What are GLP-1 agonists? GLP-1 agonists are a class of medications that mainly help manage blood sugar levels in people with type 2 diabetes. Some GLP-1 agonists can also help treat obesity. GLP-1 agonists are most often injectable medications, meaning they require an injection of a liquid medication with a needle and syringe. The major class of GLP-1 agonists is the semaglutide. The most noted drug of this class is Ozempic. How does Ozempic work? It increases a certain receptor called GLP-1, which slows down the digestion process. As a result, there is a decrease in appetite and cravings, so the individual no longer experiences bouts of excess hunger. So the users of GLP-1 drugs eat less and consequently lose weight. It also improves the beta cells of the pancreas to assist in the restoration of insulin levels and can in fact improve insulin resistance, which is a major factor in weight gain and metabolic disease. It also assists in preventing the overproduction of sugar in the liver while also slowing down the breakdown of glucose from the liver. This has made medications of this type prevalent for the treatment of diabetes and high blood sugar. Semaglutides also act on ghrelin receptors in the brain. Ghrelin is the hormone responsible for making one feel hungry when other hormones like leptin are not blocking it. Since semaglutide blocks ghrelin, you feel less hungry throughout the day. Many semaglutide users say the medication aids in the reduction of constantly thinking about food during the day. Although Ozempic is the most prominent medication of its type, there are other similar brands such as Rybelsus, Wegovy, Trulicity, Victoza, and Mounjaro.
It's my pleasure to welcome our guest, Dr. Kathy Chadman. She is a neuroscience researcher right here on Staten Island at the Institute of Basic Research, and she has a PhD in pharmacology, and she's going to help us here talk about GLP-1s and GLP-1 agonist drugs, and let us know, what is your impression about the GLP-1 agonists? What do you know about them that you want to share?
Well, I'm taking one, so I got kind of interested, although it's not really my field of study.
Okay.
So there's the two big ones out there right now. Semaglutide, which is marketed for diabetes as Ozempic, and for weight loss as Wegovy. And then there's tirzepatide, which goes under Mounjaro for diabetes and Zepbound for weight loss.
So it's interesting you say that, though, because I've heard about the first three, right? Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro. I know there's some other ones. I have my notes here. Trulicity, I've heard, is one. Victoza, and Rybelsus.
Those are some older ones that have been on the market for a long time. One of the main reasons people are more excited about the newer ones is because you only have to take them once a week. Those don't have as long of they're not as long lasting, so you might have to take a shot every day versus once a week.
Oh, so that's the biggest difference, because really we used to hear a lot about Rybelsus and Trulicity, but you're saying that some of those, because as I'm looking at my charts here, it says that Rybelsus was once daily, right? And Wegovy is weekly, and Mounjaro is weekly. As a matter of fact, there was one here, I guess it's in the last, is Byetta, which was twice daily. I guess you would have to actually stick yourself twice a day.
People who have diabetes and have to take insulin know how to do that, but for people who just want to lose weight, don't have other issues, sticking yourself that often is often a thing. There is an oral version of semaglutide.
There is an oral version.
There is. I've heard it's not nearly as effective, but it can be taken daily.
Okay.
I forget what it's marketed as, but.
So let's discuss the semaglutide mechanism, and only because in the past, when we started hearing about weight loss drugs, even though I know that you said some of them here were really prescribed for diabetes, right? But we'll get into that. But it's interesting to hear how these medications were prescribed to help the input, right, in terms of caloric input, or to control the caloric input. Much of the other ones in the past were things that sped up your metabolism, so they were kind of like after the fact. It's basically said, once you have consumed whatever amount of calories that you consumed, that we would rev up the metabolism in order to have you burn those calories faster, but these work very differently.
They do. Yes. So they work on, so semaglutide is a glucagon-like peptide 1 agonist. And so that it actually helps your body work more efficiently when it actually is an insulin releaser, which you would think is actually contraindicated. But what it actually helps is your body become more sensitive, so it releases it when it needs to and helps it not do it when it doesn't need to. So it is actually helping the performance of your body reacting to the different foods that you eat and metabolize.
So let's talk a little bit about insulin, right? Because when we think about when we refer to insulin as a hormone or a neurotransmitter, or
the only difference between a hormone and a neurotransmitter is that one's in the brain.
Okay, gotcha. So let's call it a hormone, right? Just for the sake of our conversation.
Well, a neurotransmitter actually works in a synapse, but a lot of hormones can act as neurotransmitters as well. It's a blurry line.
Gotcha. So let's call it a hormone just for the sake of our conversation, right? So what the insulin does is insulin will affect, obviously, how sugar is regulated, and then as a result has some mechanism towards controlling appetite and hunger, correct?
So if you've had like a high carb meal, you've got lots of sugars growing around in your blood,
right.
That's no good. That's when you get all those bad symptoms of diabetes. Insulin helps pull those sugars out and put them into storage or your fat cells.
Right.
So a lot of insulin will help you get fatter, but it keeps you healthier because it keeps the sugar from affecting the other organs.
Gotcha.
But if you get that more targeted release so that it's more precisely timed just when you need it and it goes away when you don't, that actually helps your body process everything more efficiently.
Got it. So with that, how does the GLP-1 agonist affect insulin?
So the technical stuff I'm sorry, I'm not. But it acts, so this, the GLP is a peptide in your body that stimulates insulin release from the pancreas.
Gotcha.
And I'm calling it an agonist because it acts in the same way. It binds to the same receptors as GLP-1 to cause the insulin release.
Gotcha. So it kind of sends a message for how to regulate the insulin.
Yes.
Right, which makes sense because that would state why it would be utilized for diabetes.
Absolutely.
Right, with insulin being the major functioning that's determined whether someone is diabetic or not, right?
But the efficiency is also really important because you have other things that, people can just take insulin.
Right.
But just doing that doesn't work as well with your body. Basically it kind of makes you fat, right? Because it's in there all the time and is pulling all those sugars out and pulling them into the fat cells.
Right.
But when it helps your body actually be more with finesse.
Right.
It raises it when it needs to and decreases when it doesn't need to. So
Right.
like things are more efficient.
I didn't realize that the mechanism actually makes the insulin sort of like has a critical manner of being able to calibrate when it's necessary to be released or not. That's
That's one of the big ways it works.
Right.
It also gets into the brain though and has effects there that we are not nearly as certain of.
Okay, so let's save that for just
Yeah.
1 second, because I find that to be incredibly interesting. So in the meantime, so you have this regulation of the insulin, which is going to regulate how the sugar is either stored or how the sugar is going to be released for whatever utilization, right? Because some of it's going to be stored not only in the liver, but some is going to be stored in the muscles and utilized for energy, which is kind of like what we want, right? That's the purpose of how exercise helps to balance all this stuff off. But then now, with how does that affect why people are losing weight? So we have this whole function here. We understand like now sort of the pathology of it, but how does it affect people losing weight, and especially in the manner of which they are?
I mean, that's where it's a little more, that has an effect. But again, if you talk to people who are on these drugs, and I'm one of them, the central actions, by central I mean acting in the brain, those actions are actually really critical too, because the term food noise, it's real. I didn't know it was real until I started taking these drugs and it wasn't there anymore. And it's not like, oh, I obsessed about food all the time, but like, I would always be thinking about it, like, oh, what am I going to have for dinner? Or even after I decided, my brain would keep coming back to it. It was hard to get the thoughts of food out of my head. And now, if I'm not hungry, I don't think about food.
Gotcha.
And I'm not often very hungry.
Which is one of the things that I've heard a lot of people say, because, I mean, not only just you, but I have quite a few of my clients who are taking, these GLP-1s. Primarily, I have one that's on Ozempic, I think 3 that are on Ozempic, and one that's on Mounjaro. And the thing that they say primarily is that they no longer think about food nearly as often or nearly as intense as they once did. So it's interesting to me, because talking about that food noise, one of the things that I studied recently to get prepared for the interview was that the effect of leptin and ghrelin. And so that if leptin is the neurotransmitter, let's see, hold on, that blocks the ghrelin, right? So just to give you a little bit of review, so we're all having the same conversation, is that ghrelin is the hormone that sends the messages to the brain to induce hunger, induce appetite. Now, leptin is the one that induces satiation. So they're kind of like, I don't want to call them in a fight, but they're looking to see about maintaining, they're opposed. They're maintaining balance. So one of the things that they said what the semaglutide does is that it replaces the leptin in terms of how it affects ghrelin. So it blocks, where the leptin would come in and block ghrelin, now the semaglutide comes in and blocks ghrelin, which stops with the message to the brain for hunger.
Oh, I hadn't really looked into the leptin and ghrelin part. I didn't know they were playing such a big role in the action of these drugs.
Right. But I find it interesting because, once again, that kind of makes sense why the food noise would stop. So you have that one. So I think, from what I understand, is that there could be threefold. Number one, like you said, you have the insulin regulation that goes on. Number two, there's that food noise with the leptin and ghrelin, and then you also have where because of the slowing down of the digestion that happens in the digestive tract.
I agree with all of those, but I would add one more: the reward system,
which is
in our brain. Like things that make you feel good.
Yeah.
Food is less rewarding, and if you look at the forums and all these other people, so many people are saying it's not just food. A lot of them stop drinking. Some of them stop smoking. It just sort of seems to be a byproduct. So I think the reward system is dampened a little bit with the drugs as well. So it's a central action, but it goes to, I eat because of, eating makes me feel good.
Right.
But now it doesn't do that as much anymore, so I don't need it as much.
Right. That makes sense. Now, what has been your experience on the
So it's
medication?
been...
And you're saying you're using which one?
The Zepbound.
Okay, so just describe for the audience what Zepbound is, because people are going to be very familiar with Ozempic. I mean, Ozempic seems to be like the brand name, like the Xerox.
It's been around a little longer.
Yeah. And compared to, what's the other one we just said? Ozempic and Wegovy. I mean, those
Yeah.
are more popular ones. So Zepbound is?
So Zepbound it's the common name is tirzepatide, and it was approved in May 2022. So it's very similar to semaglutide. It acts on that GLP-1 agonist, but it also acts on the gastric inhibitory polypeptide receptor as well as an agonist. And it's actually it's very similar in shape and function structure to the GIP. And so it actually is hitting two different things. So all the things we talked about are what the GLP-1s do, but GIP actually acts in concert with it, so you get sort of a double effect. So Zepbound, actually in all the studies, people have lost a little bit more weight with it and have had fewer side effects.
Okay, so let's talk about the side effects real quick.
Yeah.
So what are the side effects that you've experienced? I mean, I have some clients who've explained the side effects to me that they've experienced, but what's your experience been
So
like?
I gotta say the first week was awful. The first 4 days, I felt terrible. I was nauseous. I had to use the bathroom frequently, and I almost didn't take the second injection.
Really?
The second injection, I felt fine, and then I actually kind of started feeling good.
Really?
So I have a lot more acid reflux, which I'd never had before. So that's kind of new. I manage it with over-the-counter drugs. It's not that bad, but if I forget to take them, it happens. It's
feel
there.
it. Okay,
oh
gotcha.
yeah, absolutely. I now carry Tums with me, and sulfur burps. So like when you burp, sometimes that really awful taste of sulfur. I get those sometimes, not that much.
Right.
And it's gone up and down. Sometimes I have a lot more energy, but I've also had some fatigue here and there, depending on when I take it.
Right.
So I actually try and modulate it so that like the fatigue happens when I'm going to bed. But it's not that bad.
Gotcha.
Not that consistent.
So when you say like the first week was awful, right? And then you said the second week you were feeling good. Explain what would be the difference, not just saying that you're feeling good, but was it better than what you were normally feeling? Were you feeling like exceptional? So just describe that.
I felt like I had a lot more energy. And I've been working with you for a long time. I have no cartilage in my knees. And I mean, through red light therapy, they had been doing better, but after I started taking the tirzepatide, I forget to use the red light most of the time because my knee very rarely bothers me. And about a year and a half ago, I was close to like going for shots and surgeries and everything. And now I may notice it once a week, and I may take drugs for it once every other week.
Really?
It's maybe not even that much anymore.
Do you think there could be some kind of anti-inflammatory?
It's clearly anti-inflammatory.
Really?
Hugely. So there's research out there. If you go and like look at PubMed or something, they're trying this for everything.
Right.
I mean, because they don't exactly know what the central effects are. One of your other clients got really interested because sleep apnea, it apparently has some help with that. They're definitely studying it for Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease.
Really?
And because of the things I've been hearing about, and I felt myself, like I wasn't a big drinker, but I almost, somebody has to hand me a drink and I've got to be in a social situation for me to even think about drinking these days. I think substance abuse, it might actually have a role there as well. Really?
So I didn't realize that, because my impression was that the medication really got introduced, and it's been around for a while, right? It's been like, it was just like 20 years ago or something like that.
Those other versions they were in the early 2000s.
So in the early 2000s. So this has been around about 20 years, but it's really just starting to kind of like
it's going to explode.
Peak.
We're not there. We're not
even there yet.
There, I think I've heard anywhere from 18 to 26 different versions are in the pipeline right now, and they're hitting more receptors and they're even more effective. I know there's one called Retatrutide or something like it. Retatrutide. Anyway, it hits a third thing beyond what Zepbound does, and it's in the final stages of clinical trials. It'll probably be out in a year or two, and I think that's one of the reasons the prices are staying so high, because they know once these newer drugs get through the pipeline and are available, I think Ozempic and Zepbound are probably going to be the ones that the less effective ones that people aren't as excited about. Right,
and so competition hopefully will drive the price down. Now again, I want to talk about some of the, we talked about some of the side effects. Nausea, vomiting, bloating, abdominal pain, headaches, gas, constipation.
Bloating. I have had the bloating. I haven't really had I haven't had much nausea.
Well, there's more. There's constipation, the opposite, diarrhea, and then heartburn, and then dizziness. So for people who are thinking about using these medications, I mean, it's not necessarily going to be smooth sailing, especially like you said up front, right? There's an acclimation period for people who are taking them.
And also, you start out slow on these drugs. They don't start you at the therapeutic dose.
Okay.
Because if you did that, you would probably want to kill yourself. You'd be so miserable. So I'm more familiar with Zepbound, of course, but the therapeutic dose is 15 milligrams per shot. I mean, I'm not there yet, and I've been on it for 6 months.
Right.
You start at 2.5. And if people are losing weight there, they stay there.
Right.
If they're not, then they go up to 5. It goes up in 2.5 milligram increments. And you kind of meet with your doctor or whomever's providing it, and talk to them about like if you want to go up or not. Like if you're not losing a lot of weight. I've lost a lot of weight, but I'm sort of a slow responder because it's maybe a little less than a pound a week.
Gotcha.
Which is fine with me.
But that's great because that's more
complaining.
likely the amount that you're going to be able to keep off long term anyway.
Exactly.
So people who are looking to lose a tremendous amount of weight, I mean, in the beginning, well, that's a whole other conversation. But most of the time, if you lose the weight too fast, you have a tendency to put it back on. But if you lose it a little bit slowly over time,
your
you have a
body
tendency
gets more
to keep it
chance
off. Exactly.
That's
With
that
the
point.
adaptation, the acclimation. But there's a couple things that I want to discuss real quick before we wrap this up, which is some people think that they'll be able to take these medications and not have to exercise. Now, I'm assuming that that's absolutely not the case. From what I'm understanding, that the exercise becomes even more crucial.
So what I've heard, the best way I've heard it described is it evens the playing field for people who have weight issues.
Gotcha.
It evens the field so that all those things they tell us to do that never worked in the past, they're easier to do and they start working for us.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, I work out. I come see you 3 times a week. I haven't really changed much else in my diet, but I do work out regularly and, I try and eat a healthy diet. And the weight's been coming off. But absolutely, you have to incorporate those things because, I mean, you might lose some weight, but if you don't change your lifestyle, don't do everything else, I mean, if you want to stay on it for life, they're very expensive drugs.
Right.
There's shortages. They're hard to get sometimes. There's a lot of stress involved with all of that. So if you think of it more as it's one part of the team, or one part of the system that's working to help you lose weight. I mean, you're an expert in this field. Not just one thing does it. I mean, I always think working out is for my health, and what I put in my mouth affects my weight.
Right. For
the most part. So that it's a 2-part system. This adds that third part that helps me do less of this.
Gotcha.
But you got to do the rest to see the results.
Gotcha. Well, listen, we could go on and on about this. And as I said before, once we got talking, we knew it was it could go on and on and on. But, we're going to have to invite you back to continue this conversation about this medication, your experience, and other things that may be going down the pipeline. So once again, I want to thank you so much for joining us here in the 50 Plus Fit Club. And thanks once again, Dr. Catherine Chadman.
Thank you so much, Tony.
It is imperative to take into account that individual results and responses will vary regarding the taking of any prescribed medications. Always follow instructions as indicated by your licensed medical professional.
Thank you again for joining us here at the 50 Plus Fit Club. And always remember this: all good things can come to you. Your dream of health can come true. The health you have can be divine, but it will take some work and time. Your life's decisions must be wise, so please eat well and exercise. Keep away from stress and strife, and let God bless you with a wonderful life. Always remember to put your heart and soul in your goal and be phenomenal.